peeps, Nips Knits here, and in today's video I'll be showing you how to add in a new ball of yarn while working the 1x1 rib pattern. So before we get started, just a quick note, you should have paused when you have at least 10 inches of yarn remaining from your original ball of yarn. Also, for this technique specifically, I do not like to add in the new ball of yarn on the very first stitch of a row. There are some techniques where you will want to add in a new ball of yarn on the very first stitch, for example if you're switching colors, but for this pattern we're keeping it classic with one color, and so for this technique specifically, please make sure you've worked at least a couple of stitches on a row before we go ahead and add in the new ball of yarn. As you can see, I've worked a few stitches, so I am good to go. Also in this example, I was just about to purl a stitch, so if you'd like to follow me step by step, please also make sure that you are like me and about to start a purl stitch. Now that we have that covered, let's go ahead and grab our new ball of yarn. I'll find the tail end here and measure about 5 inches or so. Once I have this good to go, I am going to hold these 5 inches parallel to my left hand knitting needle and hold this in place with my left thumb, right here, just in front of my left hand knitting needle, the 5 inches or so just dangling about. Then I'm going to take the 10-inch tail that was from my original ball of yarn and bring it around my right hand knitting needle, getting ready to purl the next stitch, just following the same 1x1 rib pattern. Now what I'm actually going to do is hold this 10-inch tail from my original ball of yarn and take the yarn from now my new ball of yarn and hold them parallel together in my right hand here. We're now going to purl the next stitch using both strands of yarn instead of just the normal one strand of yarn. So I will insert my right hand knitting needle into the stitch as if to purl. Then, still holding the 5 inches in place from the new ball of yarn with my left thumb, I will take my right hand holding both strands of yarn and wrap it around the right hand knitting needle to purl the next stitch. Go ahead and purl that stitch using both strands of yarn. Now, bring both strands of yarn around the back of your right hand knitting needle, and following the 1x1 rib pattern, we know that the next stitch is a knit stitch. So let's go ahead and knit that stitch, again using both strands of yarn parallel to one another, wrap them around the right hand knitting needle, and knit that stitch. Now we're going to do one more stitch using both strands of yarn, so bring them around so that we can purl the next stitch, again just following the 1x1 rib pattern. And voila, I have now purled that stitch. So we've officially completed 3 stitches using that double strand of yarn. A purl, a knit, and a purl. Now what I want you to do is drop the strand of yarn from the original ball of yarn, and you could also drop this 5-inch tail that we had measured from the new ball of yarn and just leave those dangling there for the time being. And continue to work this row using just the strand of yarn that's connected to your new ball of yarn. So, like I said, please proceed with knitting and purling this row using just this new strand of yarn. I've just finished that row using just my new strand of yarn. Now I will turn my scarf and we'll just proceed with knitting and purling the next row, again using just the new strand of yarn. Now when you get to these 3 double-stranded stitches, what we're going to do is just act as if they're any usual stitch. In our minds, they're not double-stranded, we're not, knitting or purling these separately. They're one stitch for each of these 3 double-stranded stitches. Alright, I've just gotten to the place on this row with the 3 double-stranded stitches. Like I said, they're just any typical stitch in my brain. We are not acting as if they are double-stranded. They are just single strands in my head. So we're proceeding as usual with the 1x1 rib pattern. I'll now complete the remainder of this row. Alright, beautiful, great job. I would now just turn my work over as usual and proceed with the 1x1 rib pattern for the body of my scarf, now using my new ball of yarn. And just a quick note, I know you have some tails dangling here. Please do not worry about these for the time being. We'll weave these into our scarves at the very end so that they won't just be dangling here when you're wearing your scarf around. But there you have it. You now have a new ball of yarn to work with, and you can proceed with the body of your scarf.